Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Everyday Anarchism. I'm your host, Graham Culbertson, and my guest today is Alexandre Lefebvre. I'm recording this little intro because after Alex and I recorded an episode, we decided to record another one. So, although we don't know it when you're hearing this intro, what we're actually recording is part one of this Anarchism and Liberalism series, and we're going to call it Marrying Anarchism and Liberalism, because Alex and I wanted to discuss all of the ways that we thought liberalism and anarchism go together, and then spend the second half of our interview pulling them apart. But we found so many connections that we really only got into the disagreements at the very end of the episode, and we decided to record another one. So here's part one, Marrying Liberalism and Anarchism, and you will get to hear us get divorced in a future episode. All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Everyday Anarchism. I am your host, Graham Culbertson, and my guest today, allow me to mispronounce the name, is Alexandre Lefebvre, something like that. Did I fudge it appropriately?
Oh, you got it perfectly.
I mean, I do this almost every episode. I say the name and then I say, did I do it right? Unless I actually know how to pronounce their name. And I don't know why I always ask because no one cares. But anyways, the book we are here to discuss is Liberalism as a Way of Life. Alex, thank you for joining me.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
All right. So first, let me give a little introduction to the listeners. So the reason why I invited Alex onto the podcast is because I was talking with John McGowan, who, if you're a regular listener to this podcast, you know John's work. He was my dissertation director. He's been on this podcast 4 times now, I think, something like that, most recently discussing Hannah Arendt. And John was just really excited about this book, Liberalism as a Way of Life. And I said to John something like, well, it all sounds really interesting. Does he address all of the critiques that I have of liberalism? And John said, no, not really. And then I said, well, should I have him on the podcast and ask him about that? And John said, I don't know, fine by me. It's your podcast. So I thought I'd email you. And as any listener to this podcast knows, and I'll shut up soon and let you talk. I'm really enamored of the idea that liberalism and anarchism, or what I would call anarchism, and, you know, I quote Hobsbawm all the time. Hobsbawm says, you know, all the Enlightenment left philosophies, communism, socialism, liberalism, anarchism, they're all sort of aiming at the same, he calls it gentle anarchy. The disagreements, you know, I hate whatever you want to call it, Marxist, Leninism, Stalinism. I can't stand it. But their description of what supposedly is going to happen once the state withers away is very nice, and I like it. And I think even Kropotkin describes it as anarchy. So, like, the question is not what world do we want to live in. Peaceful New England villages is the world we want to live in, all of us. The question is, how do we get there? And there have traditionally been disagreements between the various traditions. So how does that sound for a starting point? And then take it away wherever you would like.
No, that sounds great. Listen, first of all, I'm always happy to ride John McGowan's coattails. So that is a pleasure to do. And thanks to John for recommending me. So I mean, everyone wants anarchy. You know, I think that's right on everyone's day. I don't think that's just a leftist. Sorry, this is not a question I had meditated. These are fresh questions. So let me give my hot take. I don't think that's just a left sensibility. I think that's a political sensibility in some sense. I mean, less authoritarian, let's set that to the side. But even people on the right wing right now, who are aiming at the state to promote a certain conception of the good life, because that's where I see the right wing going right now. They want everyone to kind of like naturally or through deep custom and habit start occupying the role that they should have in society and living within a broader New England, let's say, teleology. And it might take, as it were, a hard fork to get there, and we might need some serious oppressive state power in the first instance to get everyone singing from the same, in this case, literal hymn sheet. But the goal, I mean, I think is everyone wants rules to be socialized or habits and norms. And so in that sense, for the state to wither away, because it's just neither effective nor gentle to have have a police officer on every corner bossing you around. So I guess I'm happy to concede or agree with you to this point. I'm curious to see where you're going to go with it, that we are all crypto anarchists. So let's start there.
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting. This wasn't where I was planning on going either. I mean, we can talk about, whatever Ross Douthout and Strauss and J.D. Vance and Peter Thiel. I'm not sure I want to talk about those people, but it is true that when you read them and their soul craft, it can also be, this is a term. The term soul craft is a term that Alex has used, so that's why I'm using it. They can be quite amenable. Burke and Hayek, I find quite amenable until they get to precisely as you say. They're like, well, I mean, we got to kill a lot of people.
Yeah,
we got to kill a lot of people.
That needs to happen. Yeah.
And once we kill all those people, we can have this gentle anarchy that Hobsbawm is talking about. And the real disagreement between Strauss and Robespierre is who you're gonna kill before you get to the gentle anarchy.
That's right. No, I agree with that. Listen, and let me play in your territory, on your sandbox for a second. And this is a bit of the recording that we just started chatting at the beginning, so this isn't on it. But in 50 minutes or so, you have a hard out because you have to read Tolkien to your kids. You're going to read The Hobbit. But I mean, The Shire, isn't that kind of like a right-wing anarchist kind of perspective? I'm not saying that pejoratively, but is that wrong?
That was the first episode of this podcast.
Okay,
the very first episode of this podcast. Tolkien is absolutely a Tory anarchist. He, it's like, yeah, everything will be fine. And yeah, there's rich people and poor people, and it's okay because the rich people have a sort of better character in the Shire. Once you get out of the Shire, it's not anarchy anymore, but it's good and everyone's fine and happy, and Sam and Frodo get along very well and know their place, and there's no real government. And yeah, absolutely. Tolkien is a conservative anarchist without a doubt.
Yeah. Okay, great. Yeah. So, I mean, listen, so the book, okay, so Liberalism is a Way of Life, to get this kind of clicking with that. So the pitch of the book is that today, in our day and age, when a lot of people no longer profess religion and don't go to church, I'm one of them, we still have a moral compass and a moral framework. We just have a difficult time recognizing what that might be. And the way I start the book is, if you ask any kind of rando on the street where they get their values from, for a lot of them, that's going to be a very difficult question to answer, even though it's in a sense the most fundamental and also should be the easiest question. So someone who's religious will just go bang my church or the Bible or some kind of tradition. And that's great. That's terrific. But for a whole lot of us, I don't think we have that. And so what the book is trying to do is propose that perhaps if you dig a little bit and just start to kind of elicit your intuitions, then maybe you're liberal in a very deep sense. So if things like freedom, fairness, tolerance, irony, reciprocity, if those are somehow at your conception of core important values, and not only your political values, but somehow how you raise your kids, how you conduct yourself at work, all of this stuff, then I suggest that you might be liberal in a very deep sense. So in that sense, I think that listen, this is something I'd want to ask you. If the trick to successful anarchy is hegemony, in the sense that the norms have really gone more than skin deep and have been absorbed, then I think that liberalism then, for a lot of us, would be a kind of dovetail nicely with anarchism, because it's just, to use the metaphor of the book, that it's right from its cover, but liberalism is the water that we swim in, and it's as invisible to us as water is to fish because of its ubiquity. So that's the pitch of the book. Where does that sit with you?
Yeah, that feels absolutely right to me. I mean, I find this idea very convincing. I found that part of the book very convincing. The idea that, the words that people object to, that you're not supposed to say, the slurs, that those exist because, we are supposed to all be liberals, and these foundational ideas of equality and reciprocity and decency, liberal values that you can find in, you like the in Enlightenment and 19th century liberals a little more than I do. I prefer Montaigne, certainly. And there's historical reasons why Montaigne doesn't quite sit at the pantheon of your liberals, because he doesn't, because you say liberalism is modern liberalism. Never mind. Go ahead.
He's a grandfather for sure. There's no doubt that he's an important precursor.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think I think that's right. And I mean, you make the point. We've tread this ground already, but I think it's worth pointing out again that a lot of right-wing objections to what I usually call progressivism. It's sometimes, that lately it's the identitarian progressivism, what is called woke or CRT or DEI or whatever. Those right-wing objections are often couched in straight liberalism, which is one of the reasons why liberalism got a real bad name for the past 10 years in progressivism.
I agree with that diagnosis entirely. That those, I mean, I don't think that the post-liberal right is in fact fully liberal, but I think that particular wing of attack about it is indeed an equality of opportunity, of a kind of blindness, to use a Rawlsian veil of ignorance kind of metaphor. I think that's correct. I think that's right.
Yeah, and I've probably told this story on the podcast before. I certainly have said it like in my real life to students and friends all the time. Like, I love Ross Douthat's columns when they are critiques of progressivism. Yeah. I read this and I'm just like, yes, you've got it. And then when he writes the world that he would like to see, which is a totally illiberal world, I just think, wow, how did we end up on such? Right.
Yeah. So you vibe with him critically, but when it comes to a positive program, you're kind of out.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, no, that seems right to me. So, I mean, okay, so the point of departure of my argument is that so people who call themselves liberals, I think, tend to not see liberalism quite rightly today. And in particular, people who are kind of like Democratic Party, to use I should say this because my voice will sound American, and it's important to me to say this at this juncture of history. I'm a Canadian. I work and live in Australia, but I'm Canadian and not an American in waiting. But to use the American
Actually, hold on. Let me ask a historical question real quick before we go on, because I don't know the answer to this. Right. Does liberal have the same right-wing connotation in Canada as it does in the rest of the Commonwealth?
Yeah, okay, so this is a great question. So good nomenclature question. So it depends totally on like what airport you're standing in, basically, as to what word liberal means. So if you're in Canada, liberal means center and then slightly center left. That's what that means.
Okay.
Here in Australia, it means center, a bit more righty. And in the United States, I think it means effectively progressive, more and more. But if you go to France, it means like you're a cold-blooded individualist. So the term moves all the time. So my own political sensibility is that I'm a center left kind of guy. And we can talk about that for what it's worth.
Yeah, no, we don't need to just go on. I just needed to get that sense because I knew what liberal meant in what liberal meant in America, Australia, the UK, France, but I realized Canada, I just sort of assumed the words mean the same thing in America, and I realized that wasn't a good assumption.
It's a good scruple. That's right. So anyway, so what I think is that people who think of themselves as liberals are often misrepresent the doctrine because they think that it's just a political thing or a social and political thing, something having to do with constitutions, laws, courts, taxation, that kind of thing. And I don't think that's wrong. I just think it's limited and dated because I believe that liberal concepts that may have once started at this kind of mothership of political life have spread, diffused, disseminated, whatever you want to say, into the background culture of Western liberal democracies, such that today most people learn their liberalism not through like civics lessons, but through turning on Netflix or just going to the latest whatever YouTube video or going on dating apps or just all that stuff. I just feel has become very hegemonically liberal. And so I think that liberals aren't cognizant of that. Whether they're Machiavellian in the sense of trying to disguise it is one question, but they're at least not explicit about it one way or the other in good or bad faith. Now, conservatives come onto the scene and they're like, fuck that. This is absolutely a misrepresentation of what what liberalism is. That its ubiquity and its hegemony are its starting positions and that it has a strong, indeed a sacramental idea of what the good life consists of. When I read, so people like Douthat and my kind of most favorite authors here are Deneen, kind of a love-hate, mostly a hate, and then Vermeule, a love-hate, but mostly a love. Those are the authors I really like. And they agree that liberalism has a conception of the good life, but their beef with it, and Douthat's too, is that it's pathetic, that it has diminished all the great excellences of human life, that anything like honor, self-sacrifice, valor, piety, loyalty, all that stuff is just basically evacuated in liberalism for these kind of watery crap values that at their best are thin, at their worst are just egoistic hustling of people trying to grind out whatever positional advantage they have. So the interesting thing is that my strongest allies in my vision of liberalism, allies or frenemies, are the conservative right, because they see liberalism in the same scope as I do. Whereas I think the political liberals, like people kind of like in the respectable mainstream Anglo-American, occupying all the chaired professorships, are just in a very stilted idea of what liberalism is. They want to say that it's like what Rawls said it was in 1992, when maybe like 80% of the country was religious and liberalism was an accessory. I just don't think that's the case anymore. And I think that any understanding right now of our world has to start from that idea that liberalism is a hegemon, and that all this other stuff, the American right, but also the European right, are all, in some interesting ways, India and China are all reactions against this hegemony and trying to preserve their cultural specificity because they think that liberalism is going to eat their existential lunch.
It's interesting because it makes sense, and this is, I think this comes up in the Soulcraft essay. It makes sense because it makes sense of, I mean, look, I think you and I are just going to disagree about Putin. I think I don't view Putin as having a view of the soul at all, but Orban maybe it makes sense of, or Modi definitely has a view of a soul that he wants to cultivate in his country and in his people. And the vapid sort of liberalism is fine because liberalism just means that the taxes are slightly higher and there's roads and women can be educated. I think Modi and Orban are right and agree with you that liberalism is deeper than that. I think that's absolutely right. And I think that's a very, very perceptive thing to say. I do think Putin is just a thug, but
listen, he's a debatable case. No, my argument about this doesn't hinge on Vladimir Putin's soul, so I don't really care. But the other ones, I think we're in agreement on: Orban, Xi Jinping, Modi.
And there are Russian,
Israel as a whole. Yeah. Anyways, all these countries, I think, are becoming more and more perfectionist. They have a vision of the good life they want to push.
Yeah, there are Russian philosophers. I mean, I am not deep in this stuff. I am not interested, but there are Russian philosophers who have written thousands and thousands of pages on the autocratic Russian soul and why it's good and why liberalism will kill it. So it's not that these people don't exist. It's just Putin himself, I think, is just pure fucking strong man.
An ex-KGB agent is not the place you would expect to find this soul crap. Yes. But who knows? Anyways, let's put Putin behind us.
Yeah, sorry. No, I think this is right. And again, this is where we started, and we're still in our nice agreement phase.
Right. That's it.
I don't think, there's not a thing here that Kropotkin is going to disagree. I mean, when you can play that game. People like to play the game where find passages of Thomas Paine and Kropotkin and Michel de Montaigne and Thomas Jefferson. And I mean, not Rawls because how he writes, but maybe Rorty, and scramble them all together. And you might not be sure, except for literary style, who is saying what.
Yeah, that's interesting. It would be like some sort of lame party game is just submit passages and figure out who wrote them. That's correct. So I guess for these right-wing people, where I would push back is, I mean, my book is a celebration of liberalism, and I want to say that it has the ethical resources to be a great way of life. I'm not saying it's the best way of life. I don't think there's a single criteria that could rank the different ways of life as to their excellence. That wouldn't make sense because they prioritize different things. But I think liberalism can stand on its own 2 feet along with any historical religion or political ideology, and makes for a good, rewarding, and also fun and joyful life. Now, the book, though, isn't trying to say that, like, just hooray, let's just watch Netflix and chill. The idea instead is that none of us are fully, even us people who are deep down liberals, aren't living at all up to our values. And so the audience of the book isn't trying to convince conservatives or Putinists or whatever about the quality of a liberal way of life. It's trying to sell liberals on the quality of a liberal way of life and kind of say, hey, wake up. These are the values that you profess. And by avoiding them or not living up to their ethical demandingness, which are both political and also personal, spiritual, then you're missing out on all the felicities that your way of life delivers. It's like saying you're Christian, but absolutely not doing and believing Christian things, which is sort of the predicament of most Christians, because Christianity is so very demanding. This isn't a hate on Christianity, but I mean, the kind of conscious unworldliness of Christ, along with the demand to love universally, that's hard as hell. I mean, that is a maximal idea. And so in the book, Kierkegaard is a very important interlocutor because he's the guy that recognized that people just weren't living up to his values. And he was trying to convince Christians to be Christians. I'm just doing Kierkegaard 2.0 and trying to say, hey, liberals, be liberals, because there's juice in your ideology. There's good stuff.
Yeah, I agree. I'm very sympathetic to that. Let's push a little bit further on that and talk about the idea of how one would, and I don't know, you say in this book that you think you may be the first person to have said this. I'm not sure, but this idea that, like, liberalism as a practice, sort of like Zen or calisthenics. Certainly the anarchists have gotten there. James C. Scott talks about anarchist calisthenics. This idea of mental and spiritual exercises as how you would train yourself as an anarchist. Scott does that.
Right.
Tell me what, and I mean, maybe this is the original position, but I'll let you do it. You're the expert. Give me some liberal calisthenics.
Yeah, no. So I think you're very deeply correct about the kind of background point that you're making here, which is that the anarchist tradition in particular has to have a really robust sense of spiritual practice, particularly because it underplays or it wants to get away from coercion and law and all that stuff. So if we're going to have ordered societies and ordered lives, we need to take on that labor on ourselves. And when Foucault, for example, talked in his later career about techniques of the self, care of the self, and all that spirituality stuff that defined the last 6-7 years of his life. He always said that he was really into the ancients. He was into Christianity, but he hated modern political thought because he thought it went too legal, too law-like, and that you had kind of especially the kind of proto-liberals, the Hobbes, the Locks, and stuff like that. They're all about, like Kant, especially. They're all about rights, the moral law, the political law. And he just thought that essentially evacuated the whole tradition of self-cultivation and spiritual exercise, the calisthenics you're talking about. And the one place that he points to in his late lectures as to where he might find it is anarchism. And he points to Stirner in particular. He's like, Max Stirner, that's the guy that if I were to look at this kind of migration of the tradition of spiritual exercise and practice, I'd have to find it in anarchism. And that's not a path that I'm competent in or trained in, but I think that seems right given the background assumptions of that. So the deeper background between this, since I mentioned Foucault, I'll mention his own inspiration is this French philosopher who really saw philosophy not as an academic discipline, but as a spiritual training, a way of life, as he put it over and over. And he's this French guy, historian and philosopher named Pierre Hadot, Hadot. If you're listening to this and you haven't heard of him, pick up a copy of his books, because if you have a sense that French writers are obscure and difficult and just frankly annoying, this guy is like the most anti-French author ever. He's perfectly lucid, he's clear, he's humane, he's awesome. So I would begin with a book called What is Ancient Philosophy? Or else his interviews, which are called The Present Alone is Our Happiness. Anyways, going on from that, what he wants to do is just basically compile a gigantic roster of different spiritual practices and regimens by which philosophers, he's particularly interested in Stoics, but also others, tried to rehabilitate oneself and live a certain kind of life. And so what I try to do with my book is suggest that liberalism has those exercises, but really should try to prioritize making them more explicit, because it's a crucial way in which liberals can double down on their liberalism. And the kind of smart, and I use this kind of a little bit pejoratively, part of the book that I tried to do was to read certain of Rawls's main concepts, not as kind of capital P philosophy concepts, but as something like spiritual training exercises. And so I went on a kind of hit list of his major ideas, and I focused on three in particular: the original position, reflective equilibrium, and public reason, to try to suggest that these aren't just ideas or like thought experiments or methods. They are rather something much deeper and more formative and personal. So what I tried to suggest in the book, if you've heard of Rawls, you've probably heard of the idea of the original position, which is the idea that we try to think of justice outside of our positional advantages. So I try to think of the rules of my society outside knowledge of my whiteness, my maleness, my whateverness, and try to think up rules that would be genuinely fair and establish society as a fair system of cooperation. And for Rawls, I think that that's not just a political heuristic, it's a personal formative exercises of the kind you're talking about. So in this sense, if you want to call it the anarchist Rawls, I'm perfectly happy to do that. It wasn't a tradition he gave any attention to, I'm trying to think. But that's not to say that he didn't imbibe it in other ways. And here, I mean, if you want to go genealogically, a key point of intersection would be Judith Shklar, who was if he was the king of political philosophy at Harvard, she was the queen, and a much more historical sensibility. And she wrote a lot on Montaigne and the idea of the sentiment of liberalism and the kind of ordinary virtues, ordinary vices that liberalism has. And for her, Montaigne is the OG of this whole enterprise. And liberalism starts not in rules or in constitutions, but in a felt abhorrence to cruelty. And that's something that gets picked up and then institutionalized by later thinkers. Montesquieu is a key figure for her, but that's how that story goes. So I think that there's really kind of like a winding path that we could, or like a tapestry, to use a Trump metaphor, we could weave these different traditions of liberalism, anarchism, by going through their kind of great thinkers of Shklar and Rawls and find a common ground there.
Yeah, I think that's all right. I'm just going to throw out also, so in terms of against cruelty or Orwell, I mean, and especially Rorty's reading of Orwell, and Orwell was a lot of things, but one of the things he was an anarchist, at least some of the time. Okay. And then the person, anyone listening to this podcast has heard me say this name 1,000 times, 1 billion times. It's Ralph Waldo Emerson, who is undoubtedly a key figure in liberalism, and for my money is also the key intellectual figure in anarchism, even though he is not traditionally, read and made pamphlets out of. Although Emma Goldman does make Emerson and Thoreau pamphlets and hand them out. And then finally Cavell, who I'm certainly wouldn't call I distinguish between capital A anarchists and everyday anarchists. Cavell, not a capital A anarchist, definitely an everyday anarchist. And then and is hanging out with Rawls. And when my undergraduate mentor came on and did the episode about Cavell, he talked about, Cavell talking about Rawls bailing student radicals out, especially bailing black radicals out of prison and that sort of thing. So the left liberals in the Rawlsian Montaigne less rules, more soulcraft tradition, and the anarchist. I mean, Emerson is just indistinguishable between these two traditions. He embodies the two of them so well, and Thoreau as well.
Yeah, that's we need to get some controversy, because heated agreement does not a podcast make. But yeah, you're right. Listen, so I think this is a more academic article. So readers don't have to consult it, but I wrote a piece on Cavell's reading of Rawls, and in particular, I went to the Rawls archive, and because Cavell's reproach on Rawls, so Stanley Cavell, moral philosopher at Harvard, colleague down the hall from Rawls, and he's into Emerson, moral perfectionism generally, and then Cavell kind of had Rawls as a frenemy his whole life, at least intellectually, and his reproach to Rawls was that, it's the kind of what Foucault said about political thought, is that, dude, you're making moral life into rule-bound life.
Yeah.
And he kept on, that critique comes up, it's like held for 50 years almost in Cavell's writing, from the very earliest bits of Claim of Reason all the way to the late lectures. It's that kind of idea of Rawls that's stuck in his head. And the two met often and to discuss the criticism. And I have Rawls's note, I took pictures of Rawls's notes on the meetings, and they're just like, they're just a picture of confusion. And Cavell's just coming at him with like Emerson, Thoreau, and Rawls like, what the fuck? He's just writing down random Cavell phrases, trying to make sense of this patchwork. But I have a sense that when you kind of put aside the kind of Rawls industry kind of thing, and you look at what Rawls is trying to do, particularly on the stuff when he works on moral psychology. It's so him and Cavell are just like really riding on the same. Yeah, they're kind of they're riding the same car. So that's good. Now, tell me though, what do you hate about liberalism?
I hate absolutely nothing about the liberal tradition that you're. I mean, you're getting antsy because we only have 2 minutes left, and you want some heated disagreement, and it's fine. I'll give it to you. I'll give you exactly what you want. Liberalism, I have no objection to it at all. It's great as a way of life. It's perfect. It is anarchism, except that the first rule of liberalism is let's all be liberals. And then the second rule of liberalism is, and let's make rules to make sure that we stay liberals. Yeah. And rule 2 is just nuts. Let's have rules about property and make sure there's lots and lots of guns and make sure the right people have the guns. And, we should reward people who are doing well. That's just sensible. And if they do really well, we should reward them more. And then, if those guys end up controlling the guys with the guns, what you going to do? Life is a free and fair competition. So, I can go on and on and on and on and on. But this is, I think I'm sure I'm just echoing Cavell, right? As soon as you, or Kropotkin. Kropotkin has these liberals. I agree with you, but you don't see that contained within your ideology of liberalism is the thing that is going to destroy liberalism. So now I'll put this a different way, and then you can respond to it. All throughout this book, you write, the paragraph that you and I have heated agreement on. And then you say, so obviously we need to set up, a system to put this in place. And that's like, fuck. Doesn't he see that every time he puts a system in place, I should say they, but doesn't Alex see that every time they, being liberals, put a system in place for liberalism, it inevitably, it's almost, at least Kropotkin would say it's like a law of nature. Right. It descends into anti-liberalism. So in some dialectical way, liberalism, as long as it seeks to be a liberal system, is guaranteed to never be liberalism. That's what I hate about it. Okay,
This is. Let me see if I can focus. Let's see if this is this is good. So let's see if I can focus this on a profitable source. Maybe. So here's my gambit. Maybe the big split between you and me, and let's say between the traditions that we kind of embody, is that liberals are pessimists and anarchists have, in some measure, to be at least a little bit more sanguine or optimistic about human beings and what we can achieve. So this is something, I'll just build up to this a little bit. So this is something Shklar, I think, is just really genius and really powerful on. And she says that basically liberalism for her starts in misanthropy. The idea of liberals being people who hate, who at least, if hate human beings is too strong, then at least have a healthy fear and skepticism of human beings, and especially people in power. And what she says is that in her book, this is a fantastic work called Ordinary Vices, is she says that misanthropy can go in all kinds of different directions. Like it can go in super destructive directions. Like, I don't know, maybe this is a caricature reading of Nietzsche, but you could just say, fuck it, let's burn it down, let's start again. This culture is too poisoned to even be able to reform, let's try again. And so what she wants instead is to focus on certain misanthropists who are also institutionalists. And for her, Montesquieu is a core figure because he saw power consolidates kind of naturally, and he saw it leads to cruelty and to all kinds of abuses. But instead of saying, fuck it, I don't know what to do, he said, okay, let's establish all kinds of systems and rules and institutions pitted against one another that would mitigate human beings' worst impulses. So in that sense, you have a liberal who's a deep pessimist, but then also a kind of a can-do kind of guy trying to design the rules and institutions that would allow us to hang out together. So that's an institutionalist response. But then you also have a spiritualist response on the part of liberalism, which is that another kind of vision is that human beings can kind of naturally suck, or that our social systems push us into all these kinds of destructive directions. So this is a Tocqueville, that under kind of modern life, we're all going to become crappy materialists, crappy individualists, and conformists. And so what Tocqueville wanted was kind of like robust institutions and civic training and moral psychology that would inculcate people into the liberal values. So in both cases, whether that's an institutionalist response for political reasons or an institutional response for spiritual reasons, you have a very heavy-handed liberal presence coming in exactly the way I think you're objecting to. But that's because liberals are animated by this kind of prior commitment that human beings, frankly, kind of suck. And here I recall a old chestnut by Carl Schmitt. Yeah, I can't remember where he wrote this, but he's like, basically, if you wanted to do this, it'd be a cool project, says Carl. You could schematize all of political thought into basically optimists and pessimists and see where their systems fall, because it's a very clear fault line that runs through. So if you're a Hobbes or you're a Freud, you're going to go one way. But if you're, if you're a Marx or if you're an anarchist, you're going to go another way. So does that seem right, to locate the disagreement at something very fundamental, whether or not human beings indeed suck?
Yeah, I mean, the short answer is yes. The longer answer is it's complicated, right? As always. So, I mean, one way to put it, to make this distinction, to make your distinction work, is, Graeber says humans generally behave as decently as the systems they are in allow them to.
Right.
And so that's totally a statement of optimism about people. And so then obviously if that's your starting point, humans behave as decently as any system allows them to, then any system it seems like no system is going to lead to the most decent behavior. I mean, Graeber doesn't go on and say that. I think that's like the end of a paragraph or something, but it seems that seems right. And then we can get into a conversation that I don't want to have, that frankly I have with John McGowan like once a week. So I'm sure John and I will have it somewhere which is like, well, then, so how are you going to do? How are you going to do systems of cooperation? How are you going to do big things? And the anarchist tradition has various responses to that. The easiest one is let's not do big things, and that's the William Morris answer. And like, as older as I get, that seems more and more like, yeah, let's not do big things. Like, yeah, trains are great, but maybe a world without trains and also without fossil fuels would have been great. But Graeber was very skeptical of that. He thought we could do big things without systems. So that's the first thing. But then I'm going to use Kropotkin. I mean, I don't know if I'm embodying the anarchist tradition, but I'm certainly, picking and choosing the people. And Kropotkin says, and something like Montesquieu, something like polyarchy and checks and balances is a bit of a check on this. But Kropotkin says, you liberals say that, we are optimists about human nature, but you'll give someone the power to give someone else a life sentence in prison or the death sentence. You, in fact, have so many places where if people have, your definition of society, liberal society, is a free and fair cooperation, right? But it's also, and this is where the anarchists disagree, a free and fair competition. And so the liberals do accept that people who win the competition, and Rawls accepts this in a way that I find baffling. This is one of Rawls's famous claims, that it's okay for some people to have more if by doing so everyone gets more, which is why doctors get paid so much. But we all know that a society with more nurses would actually be better than a society with more doctors. And so nurses should get paid more than doctors do. And that never happens. And so that's the flaw there. This belief that people who have won the competitive game of liberalism can be rewarded with wealth and power, and then they will use it correctly because they've been battle tested by liberalism. And that's the thing that Kropotkin says, that is a totally optimistic vision of human nature. If someone got their PhD at Harvard, they're just going to do a better job than someone who got an associate's degree at a community college. And that is, I'm afraid I don't share that view. And Kropotkin at least says it's baked in to liberalism.
Yeah. Okay. Those are very fair hits. It would take a lot of thinking on this one. So, yeah. All right. Okay. So the question of Rawls as a meritocrat is very interesting, because Rawls is on one level clearly not a meritocrat. He thinks we deserve nothing. But on the other hand, as you say, he does, with this thing called the difference principle, he does justify inequality. That's the whole point of the difference principle, is the justification of inequality, and that certain social and economic reward should track onto people if those people then use their elevated position to, and that could be optimistic, and I think that's right. And I think what that depends on is people socialized in his well-ordered society and basically in his ideal liberal theory. And so the argument there then becomes, it's not so much, this is great. It's not so much that, okay, so for people to behave, okay, sorry, I'm thinking, so this is not the best for a podcast.
Yeah, do it. This is a podcast, man. You're just supposed to think and talk.
Okay, so I think you're right. I think that there's something potentially wildly implausible about Rawls's idea that kind of the winners would use their spoils and their position in order to help the losers, or the people less advantaged by the system. And that depends on you want to say on his optimism. I want to say not his optimism, but this is more fodder for your cannon, but rather on this incredibly thick institutional network of moral and political training that depends on rules and pre-K, daycare, and all of this stuff that is as far as you can get. It becomes, I mean, Orwellian's the wrong word, but it becomes a total institution of socializing people in the right way, such that they would see their good in these particularly socially beneficent ways, rather than just investing in more property or whatever they would do. So I don't think that we're breaking actually on. I think that the attribution of Rawls' optimism is wrong, because I don't think he's an optimist. I think instead where the anarchist claim really hits hard on this point is that for him to maintain that claim, he has to have a really thick institutional and moral system in place that, frankly, he lost faith in as he grew older. And he didn't lose faith for anarchist reasons, not because he thought it was too heavy-handed. He just thought it wouldn't be stable. People would defect from it, and not everyone would be on board about the same kind of socialization. So a Hindu, a Muslim, a Christian, at the end of the day, they'd have to commit to not kind of like how to raise your kids, but they would have to commit to a political framework. And he didn't go back to this idea of how he just kind of, this is great. This would be a really kind of weak spot. You found a nice underbelly here of Rawls. I think that's right. Did you want to follow up?
No, I mean, not if you're still going.
So that said, though, I mean, some of Rawls's suggestions and some of my suggestions, and so, and another book I should mention here, because it's published just at the same time, and we're a two-man Rawls band. So I'm doing kind of Rawls on kind of like spiritual life and all that stuff, and he's doing Rawls on kind of institutional life. And so it's a book called Free and Equal by an LSE philosopher named Daniel Chandler, and the books were released at the same time. They're reviewed all the time in the same places, often together. And what he observes is that, look, there's a lot of low-hanging fruit that we could reform, not by getting away from rules and institutions, but just by kind of tweaking the rules that are currently in place, particularly in the United States, that are just manifestly lead to bad outcomes over and over. So listen, I'm an Australian right now. I'm a dual citizen. We had our election last week, and we voted in a center-left person. Had we voted in a center-right person, it would have been normal too. They're basically kind of the same thing. And that's because we have institutions that aren't as bananas as yours. So we have mandatory voting, which is amazing. We have preferential voting, which is you list. So if your winner doesn't win, then your second place gets some weight, gets all weight in your preferences. And we don't have this kind of winner-take-all insanity of the United States. And I just think that there's a lot of low-hanging fruit we could do. A bit of tax reform would be nice. In the United States, publicly financed election campaigns would be kind of requisite. So rather than going full anarchist, I just think that if people in their vested interests weren't so opposed to these things, there's some really low-hanging fruit that could move us into a more just society that we just have to kind of stop sitting on our hands and get on it. So it's not a post-rule vision I'm proposing. It's let's make some core but pretty sellable tweaks to a general population and see what we can do. That's not my book. That's this Daniel Chandler's book. Yeah, because the real problem isn't doctors getting paid more than nurses. Like that's a fringe problem. The real problem is oligarchs and real estate moguls and all of the stuff that is manifestly not socially remunerative or beneficent getting all the kudos and credits and money. And so I think that we could remain within the meritocracy and not take it down 100%, just make it a little bit more corresponding to true human need. What say you?
I mean, I'm skeptical that the real problem isn't doctors making more than nurses. I mean, I think, and this is something that Graeber says as well, but I mean, I've been thinking this from before I was reading Graeber, that doctors are the
worst.
Doctors are the problem.
Say more.
Oh yeah. Well, it's just when you point out everything that's wrong with the meritocracy and how it's manifestly unfair down the line, and every group that is rewarded more by our society does less to make society good than every group that is rewarded less. It's 100%. In every single case, the meritocracy makes the wrong decision and rewards the wrong people.
Yeah.
But when you say that, people say that's not true because of doctors.
Yeah, it's the fig leaf of respectability, but you're saying even the fig leaf sucks.
Yes. I mean, here's how much the fig leaf sucks. I don't know what it's like in Australia. Doctors don't exist anymore in the United States. What would have been called a general practitioner or a family physician, they disappeared because to be a doctor requires you to go so hard into the meritocratic race, both in terms of crafting your soul into a monster of winning and also bankrupting your family unless you become a highly paid specialist, that because doctors are meritocrats, physicians, the traditional sense of doctors, basically no longer exist. And if you want to see someone because you are sick, you will see a physician's assistant or nurse practitioner. And that's why I think that the doctor thing, that seems so perfect for me, because I assume Rawls is thinking of doctors when he says...
Yeah. No, you should get a doctor on the podcast. I mean, that's the obvious move here, because you get the really interesting and smart criticisms of meritocracy, say by Markovits or Sandel, and they all take the easier cases of people who get paid a lot to keep eyeballs on screens, and I think we can agree that's not helping many people out. But they're all no one touches the doctors, and I think that would be a really go after it. Go after the selling point. I think that would be a great episode. Find some brave. Hapless merit.
I've got one in mind because he works at Duke and he's a researcher, and also he broke my wrist in a soccer game, so I think he owes me. So I'll think about that. So look, as promised, I have to go read The Hobbit. This was, I don't know, I wasn't sure how this was going to go, but this turned out to be, in my opinion, incredibly fruitful, and we didn't get anywhere near into all the stuff I think we could have said. I guess take the last word though before we go. What do you want to say?
Listen, I think I think it was a terrific thing. I think the devil are in details, and I think that if we were to dig down, I think we have there's a wonderful shared moral vocabulary that we have between our two traditions. I think if we dig down, though, as we see with particular acute cases like doctors, we split more. But that's for another day.
Okay, maybe we can split more another day. But for now, I mean, the basic idea that people should be liberals, and if you focus on being a liberal and demanding, if you're a good liberal, that the institutions you are in, I said you were going to get the last word, but now I'm responding. If you're demanding the liberal institutions that you are in liberaldom, which is this term that Alex uses for the world built by liberals that is nevertheless not liberal. It's a riff on Kierkegaard's Christendom. If you, maybe this is back to the little tweaks thing, if you spend your time trying to be more liberal, and then you look at the institutions you're a part of and ask them to be more liberal, it's not clear to me that would be that different from what Ruth Kenna calls anarchizing institutions. I think you would, as you say, reach a point. You would reach a point where liberalizing institutions and anarchizing institutions would diverge. But we are so far away from that point that if you're anarchizing institutions and you're liberalizing institutions, God, it'd be pretty close, I think.
That'd be great. Let's get married and worry about the details later. It's kind of
it's a long way down the road. It's a long way down the road. I think liberalism and anarchism go together well, and I think they're more compatible than anarchism and what I call progressivism. I mean, I really do see progressivism as an illiberal force, and I do not see liberalism as an anti-anarchist force, at least at the level of soulcraft, at the level of institutions. Sure, but that's what's going to happen.
Then we can be friends.
Yeah. Yeah, we're pretty far away for that geographically. All right, Alex, thank you so much. Say again the name of the book for the listeners.
It's Liberalism as a Way of Life, published by Princeton University Press. So it's in hardcover, out in paperback in October.
All right, thanks so much.